Welcome to Calgary in Depth. This is your host, Dan Koska. On this episode, I'll be speaking with Adam Tiller. He's a stand-up comedian based out of the Seattle, Washington area. He performs regularly at Laughs Comedy Club, Tacoma Comedy Club, Nate Jackson's Super Funny Comedy Club, and Club Comedy, among other places. And he was a participant in the World Series of Comedy Festival and a semi-finalist in Nate Jackson's Funniest MF competition. You can figure out for yourself what MF might stand for there. And he's going to be performing in Calgary at the Comedy Cave in downtown Calgary from January 6th to 11th. January 6th to 11th. And you can get details about his upcoming appearances in various places on his website, adamtillercomedy.com. I'll mention that again at the end, but just giving it to you now, adamtillercomedy.com. Thanks, Adam, for joining me today are you in Seattle right now?
I am. Yeah, thanks for having me, Dan. I appreciate it. I got to get you an updated bio a little bit so that stuff is it's like trying to remember back where that even came off of. But yeah, I'm excited to be headed to Calgary in January, and I've been there once before. Had a blast coming up there, so yeah, it should
Excellent.
be fun.
Excellent. All right. Now I am curious because largely this podcast focuses on, what it's like to live in this area and people's perspectives on it. And it's really interesting to me to talk to somebody who doesn't live here, but has been here before, and you've been to a lot of places. I know I listened to one of your stand-up routines where you mentioned that you've moved around a lot. Is that right? So all over North America or whereabouts?
Yeah, I think by the time I was 10, I had lived in maybe 11 states.
Hmm.
And my dad worked a job where like every 2 to 3 years they moved you. It wasn't military, but it required a lot of movement. So I was all in the Northeast and then down in Kentucky and spent the bulk of my time growing up in Minnesota. So
Mm.
spent a lot of time around Canadians and I'm originally from Vermont.
Hmm.
So got kind of a strange accent where it's a blend of Vermont and Minnesota together, but I think my perspective in a lot of ways has been influenced by that much movement and just trying to sort of learn to fit in wherever I go.
Right. I imagine it encourages you to be kind of an observer of people and their behavior when you're finding yourself in new environments all the time.
Yeah, I think like a lot of it was just like self-preservation is
Yeah.
it's like I was the new kid a lot and I didn't want to I've always found this like when I moved to a new place there was always one person who was this doesn't really apply to Canada, but like whenever I moved to a new place there was one person that was overly friendly to me. Like they wanted to be my friends right away.
Mm,
And quickly I realized that that person had no friends,
mm,
and that was why they're being so super nice to me. And
hmm,
I had no business being friends with that person. So I had to find out who that kid was and ignore him, and then
hmm.
try to fit in with the people that I wanted to fit in with. But it was mainly just, so I didn't have to spend all my time by myself. And I think my brothers did a version of that themselves too. It was sort of tricky, but it definitely like influenced becoming a stand-up, I think. Like I think those skills of just learning to be around people and fitting in has helped me immensely with stand-up.
And how many years now have you been doing stand-up?
6 years, I
Hmm.
started in Everett, Washington, and then started getting in with some of the clubs around here and really hit the ground running with that.
Mm,
And Pacific Northwest has a great infrastructure for starting stand-up comedy. There's Spokane, Seattle, Tacoma, Portland, like everything's very drivable.
hmm.
And I had access to a lot of stage time pretty quickly. So it's been a lot of fun. I quit my day job maybe 2 years ago and I've been doing stand-up full time since.
When I was watching some of your performance, on YouTube there, I was struck by your comfort level. You just seem like unfazed by anything the audience throws at you, and you're very comfortable interacting with the audience. Did that come easily, or did that develop over time?
I think I kind of got thrown in the deep end of the pool with stand-up.
Mm,
I was very fortunate. Laughs Comedy Club is my home club, and I came in when a lot of guys and girls moved to bigger markets.
mm,
So there was sort of this gap between when they had experienced talent and not. So they had me hosting
mm,
constantly, and I barely had 7 minutes, dude.
Hmm.
Like like I was so overwhelmed and terrified. And then as a host, you deal with kind of things happening. And
Mhm.
I kind of developed an alertness to things that occur in the room and learning to have fun with those or when to ignore them. I think doing the road has taught me a lot about what things can be fun moments to plan and what I need to kind of ignore in order for me to do my job. Because it's very different to play like a noisy bar versus a club environment. Like if you go too far into something in a noisy bar, you have the possibility of kind of losing the room entirely, and then it's
Mm.
pretty painful for 30 minutes.
Right, that can feel like a long time up there, I bet.
Yeah, it's time changes immensely when you're on stage. Sometimes the time is doing you or you're doing the time. So
Right, right. Now, it's very interesting to me whether you do you like to know a lot about a place before you go? Like if you're going to a city you've never been to before, do you try to learn a bit about it? Do you ask other comedians about what their experience has been like there and what topics kind of to stay away from or that will strike a chord with that particular audience? Does that go into your planning?
it's a good question. I kind of grapple with it because I
Hmm.
think sometimes it can be fun to kind of learn those things by being on stage.
Hmm.
And then other times you can really walk into like a I came to the wrong party type, or I said the wrong thing at the wrong party type moment.
Right.
Um, I think in general audiences are fairly understanding of any of that stuff.
Hmm.
Calgary is fantastic. I can't wait to come back. Like the guys at the cave are awesome. The owners there, it's a family operation, and it's one of the first places to let me headline. And I got up there. I had heard that Alberta was sort of the Texas of Canada,
Hmm.
and there were a lot of connotations that I had associated with that. What I found was at least the parts of Calgary that I stayed in and was around was way more diverse than I expected.
Hmm.
And I mean, I don't know what it is, but when you cross that border, like this comedic sensibility is so, people have such a good sense of humor in Canada. I don't know what's going on with you guys, but like it's the most fun audiences I ever played
Oh,
for.
really? Yeah.
I feel like I rarely can offend anybody,
Mm.
and everybody seems to get on board with it being a comedy show pretty quickly. It might be like your audiences are trained better, like they have a better understanding of what stand-up comedy looks like and what should happen, but
Mm.
it's Victoria when I did it. I just did Castlegar and it was phenomenal. There's a theater up there, and they booked myself and my friend Quinn Fitzgerald, and like it was maybe 90 people, and it was probably the best show I've done this year. So I love coming to Canada. I wish the US government was a little bit more reasonable of allowing Canadian comics to come down here because it feels very one-sided, but
Mm.
yeah, I'm excited, man.
Cool. And on your first visit, as you mentioned, you'd been told that Calgary was the Texas of Canada. I guess there's an element of truth to that in terms of it being there are more conservative elements here than in perhaps some other provinces, and a bit of that Wild West, don't tread on me spirit, which has
Sure.
its good and negative qualities.
Yeah.
What else did you get to do when you were in the Calgary area? Were you able to get out to the mountains or anything?
I didn't have a car, so
Mm,
that sort of limited me.
mm,
And I'm coming in January this I guess next month, and I won't have a car either. So I assume it's pretty cold in January in Calgary. I haven't looked at the exact numbers yet, but I'll probably be spending a lot of time inside. But what I did do was I went running like almost every day.
mm.
So I get to go run up and down the Bow River. That's how you say it, right? Or is it Bow or Bow?
It's Bo, yeah.
Oh yeah. So did that and then spent a lot of time walking around, saw some like, parks and things like that. There was a lot of different the influence of food in that area was way more diverse than I expected.
Mm,
And but the reality was I spent most of the time eating the food at the comedy club because financially I needed to do that. And then there was a Tim Hortons across the street from me. So if you have any questions about Tim Hortons, I can I can talk about it for a long time.
Great. Now, let's give the audience a bit of an idea of kind of themes that you might touch on in your act. I mean, I know from what I've seen, you talk a lot about family. You talk about your dad and your mom and your brother and your uncle, and there's pretty much no topic off limits, right? Like you don't shy away from some pretty dark stuff, talking about funerals and how you'd like your funeral to go, and
Yeah.
yeah, you don't shy away from any topics, do you?
No, I mean, what I would say is that I try to create as much as possible and then pick which topics are best for the environment that I'm in.
Mm,
So, like, I look at it's hard to find good approaches to apply to stand up
hmm
because it's just such a strange thing. But I mean, I saw it with music a lot where, like, you have certain bands that they have a lot of songs, but they're not going to play the same set list for every single show. It varies show to show.
hmm
So this is just off the top of my head, but Metallica was playing at Woodstock 99 and they came out playing aggressive music and stuff. Like they're not going to play their acoustic guitar song in that moment, with that
Mm,
however many thousand people there. So I try to fit the set best with what I'm doing, but I've never really subscribed to like avoiding any topics in particular. Even if it's something that I can't bring to stage, like I think there's value in trying to find the joke. I
yeah.
don't really have the luxury of picking topics. Like I
Mm,
guess some comics subscribe to that, but like it's so hard to find something to write a joke about that when it comes to me, I'm like, yep, I'm going with that. Like I gotta
mm.
write this down.
But I'm curious, how much of that tailoring to the audience can you do in the moment? Like, have you reached the point where you can see, oh, that's resonating. I'm getting some laughs on that, so I'll go more on that in that direction. You can adjust on the fly, or do you have to go through your set, in the way you had planned it in advance?
I think I would love to give you the answer that in the moment I can do exactly like I can
Mm,
adjust. I think that's why you headline is you keep getting better at those skills.
mm,
Um, I think having a static set can protect you at times where you know where you're going and anything that happens isn't really going to phase you. But if you can be more dynamic, you can build a better connection with the audience because it's just more the improvised element adds to the show. So
mm,
it certainly, as I do it more and more, I get more comfortable. But some of the problem is like, dude, I'm proving myself most of the places that I'm going right now.
mm,
So, like, I can't go up there and take like these massive chances and then blow it if it goes sideways, and then go look at the guy that paid me money to be there and be like, well, I thought this was the moment. Like,
mm,
they're paying me to do a good job. So, as I work places more, they tend to give you a little bit more leash. But
mm.
the reason why they're paying me is because I'm going to be there. I'm not going to be under the influence of anything. And hopefully I'm going to put on a really good show. So
Right.
it's tough to balance. You always want to be creative and kind of pushing it, but at the same time, this is their business and livelihood. And I think that comes first over my own personal exploration on stage.
hmm
Until I do a show, I book myself, and then I don't care. But if you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
if it's my own money, I don't really care. But when it's somebody else's, like that's why they asked me to be there.
Right. Now, earlier you mentioned that you're struck by the diversity you saw in the audience, because when you think of a conservative province, you might think, a bunch of white dudes, cowboy wannabes, and not a lot of diversity. But I went a few weeks ago to a comedy show here in Calgary at a different comedy club, and the audience was very diverse. And in fact, a couple of the comedians even commented on how few white guys that were white folks were in the audience. Now, of course, that also depends on the act because the headliner as well as the opener both happen to be people of color, and the headliner, I believe, forgive me, I can't recall his name, but I believe he had North African heritage and happened to be a Muslim. And I think that drew, of course, then he also had fans that reflected his own background, right? And that so the audience may have been even more, ethnically diverse because of who the performers were that night. But I think it's true that Calgary, was an extremely diverse city. And if you've never been here, you wouldn't know that, until you show up and you realize we have so many cultures here.
Dude, the only thing I knew about Calgary before I went there was that, well, I assumed it got very cold in the wintertime.
Mm,
I kept hearing the Texas of Canada thing. And
Yeah.
then I knew of the Flames because I'd seen them play before. Like I grew up playing hockey
Oh yeah.
and I it's kind of embarrassing. I mean, this year I've gone to Canada several times and I've been learning a lot more about it, but I just had no idea what the provinces were. I didn't know what British Columbia even meant. Like it's
Mm.
embarrassing how much I didn't even think about it. Granted, I'm very bad with that stuff to begin with, but it's been kind of cool getting to drive across Canada and experiencing like just how it's kind of different. The drive from Castlegar to Osoyoos was I had no idea what to expect. It was very interesting.
Mm.
The
Hmm.
roads are different. Like you guys basically only have one sign that just like don't go over this speed, and then you don't. I think it was like 100 kilometers, maybe. I don't know,
Yeah.
but I was driving in the dead of the night, and the only information I'm getting is like, "Hey, don't go too fast."
Hmm.
But yeah, it was interesting.
Now, in one of your acts that I saw on YouTube, you were talking about how different states have their visit, California campaign or visit Arizona
Hmm.
or whatever, and you go on a bit about a visit Afghanistan campaign and what that might look like,
Yeah,
which I
I didn't
really,
even know that was online.
yeah, that
Um,
was one of the headliners. You were in Salem, Washington for that headliner act that I watched.
yeah, I forgot about that one. But yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I really enjoyed that, and I'm curious. You're quite familiar now with the Seattle area, so what would a Visit Seattle campaign say? I'm curious.
uh, I think it's in somewhat of an identity crisis right now.
Oh
I
yeah.
don't know if they're in a position to. I mean, I didn't grow up here, so I didn't really get to see the like grunge era, but
Mm,
it went from grunge to Bezos real quick, and
mm,
there's
mm,
all this like sort of the heart of the city feels like it's been gutted in a lot of ways, and
mm,
then the back and forth between like social justice type stuff and then the police department getting run over and like I a lot of these things are above my understanding to even speak about, but
mm,
it's a strange place to do stand up. I can say that. It was a good place to learn to think about things differently, but when I think of my city, I don't think of the people have such a good sense of humor here.
mm.
Like people kind of keep to themselves in Seattle a lot. There are friendly people, but I don't know. It might be the influence from like so many people moving from the East Coast to work tech jobs or what, but socially a very strange city.
Hmm. I've had one quick visit to Seattle. Imagine this, 7 years ago, my wife and I, for our honeymoon, we drove west from Calgary over to Vancouver and then over to Victoria. And when we were back in Vancouver, we thought, we've never seen Seattle, let's drive down. So literally one afternoon, we drove down, went to the Space Needle and bought a couple souvenirs. The lineup was too big to go up the Needle, so we just drove back. So we were in Seattle for like less than 2 hours. And we had with us my wife's mother, who was visiting from Europe, and her sister, who was also visiting from Europe. And they came along with us on the honeymoon, and they were sharing the hotel room even with us. And they wouldn't take any hints when we were like, why don't you guys go for a walk? Why don't you go shopping? Whatever. They wouldn't take any hints. It's like, we're on our honeymoon. We're
Yeah.
sharing our hotel room. You're not leaving us alone for 5 minutes.
I mean,
And I only need three, no, three, no, sorry.
yeah,
I
yeah.
shouldn't try I shouldn't try the comedy bit with a professional here.
No, I mean that's certainly where I was going to with that. It's funny because we've had the same experience. I've never made it up to the top of the Space Needle,
Oh yeah.
and I have to imagine if you're looking at that thing while you're on your honeymoon and can't get any time alone with your wife, that's got to be weird too. So
Oh yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
it's a
It's also true that often locals won't know as much about their city as people who come to visit it because the people who visit, go up to the top of the Calgary Tower. They go to all these places. They go to the museums. They do all these things that locals kind of just take for granted. It's like, oh, that's a tourist thing to do. I'm not going to bother. So often a visitor will know more about the city and its history and have tried things out that the locals kind of don't bother with.
and you're just trying to find someone to talk to about it. You're like,
Right.
I went through the process of learning all this stuff, then all the
Yeah, yeah.
locals were like, stop talking to me about the history of this place. I don't care.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. I did think it was kind of interesting. Like by the club, they have like a big, I don't know if it's World War II tank or
Mm,
something that I kept walking past. I think it was next to like a massage one of those happy ending type places kind of close
Oh
by
yeah.
there. But I walked past those two things quite a bit, and it was interesting to look at. But there was trying to think what other parts of the city. The main thing I remember was going up and down the Bow River, and I was running on that quite a bit. Dude, it is. You got that bridge that like goes across there.
Well, if you mean the red one, there's the Peace Bridge, which is the red with kind of a lattice or crisscross pattern on it. Does that sound familiar?
This one was like underneath. It
Ooh.
was the pedestrian bridge.
I see. Yeah, yeah.
And dude, the people that were riding bikes, like it was crazy. Like I've never seen such aggressive bike riders, and they ring their bells or whatever, but I had headphones, and every once in a while it'd be like this alarm goes off, and some guy rips past me on a bike. So
Mm,
uh, that was surprising. Beyond that, like probably should have had a car while I was there, but
mm.
did a lot of stand up, did a lot of writing while I was there. Was a little bummed because your Netflix is different than the States. You didn't get the same stuff. So, and also certain websites are restricted. So when you're a guy on the road, you're, who's in a relationship, like certain website access is kind of helpful, but it
I
happened.
haven't heard that before. I didn't know that certain websites were that our internet's more restricted here. I didn't know that.
There were certain things that were blocked, but
Okay.
I've had that happen before. I don't know. This
Maybe
seems to
your
be like a
tastes are more
trend
extreme than mine.
that it could be. I don't know, but I've had that happen at some like kind of central Washington motels too. Like I don't know. There's like
Interesting.
built-in blockers, so
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but stand-up comedy, it's a fairly tight-knit community in the sense that you cross paths a lot with other comedians who are doing the same thing that you're doing, right? Like
hmm
and so you guys talk about your experiences in different places, different comedy clubs, and so on. Is there a lot of talk about, oh, you're going to that town? Here's my experience, and man, that crowd is tough, or can't get them to laugh at anything, or is there a lot of that kind of conversation happening?
Sure. I think somebody said this to me. It's like stand up is like a small town.
Mm,
Like everybody knows each other from the town, but we all go to different places. So
mm,
I've like run into people where just the strangest connections. We'll see each other in Appleton, Wisconsin, but we met in Louisiana or so, like just odd how you run into people. But I would say the extremes people tend to like remember. So if
mm,
something's really good or really bad. Bad housing situations are
mm,
communicated very well. Like, hey, don't stay. Like I know a comic got 100 bed bug bites outside of like Tulsa one
mhm,
time and just woke up and like he was just covered and he lifted up the mattress and he just saw the bugs scatter. Things like that tend to be communicated. I don't know, like regionally, there's stuff for sure, and
mhm,
maybe I'm not like at the level yet, but like Bellingham, Washington is on the way up to Vancouver, and it's a strange little pocket where you have a university up there that's very liberal, but all the area around that is very red. So you
mm,
can get some sort of odd mix of crowds at times. So
mhm.
it's like good to be aware of like what to avoid or what could be pitfalls, but I probably am not at the level of where I'm like finding out like, hey, don't work here or probably the biggest thing is anybody who's not paying money. That gets out pretty quickly.
Right. What about like if you're going to go to a place, you ever had a comedian say to you, "Oh yeah, they love it in that town if you make fun of this other neighboring town," or "Don't make fun of this aspect of their town because they're actually pretty touchy about that." Have you ever heard that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I don't use the phrase hack
Mm,
much, but I try not to garner a lot of positive respect from the like I don't want to pander in that way.
I see. Yeah,
Like
yeah.
it's a way to get an audience to like you, but it's like I don't know that town. I've had people come in and work with me before and they'll be like, "Hey, what's the town that's like 20 minutes away?" And they'll ask me that question. I'm like, "Yeah, I just don't do jokes like that because it's a ruse, right? Like I know what's going on. The audience just doesn't. They don't know that I've said that at 20 other towns this year
Mm,
and it feels disingenuous. So I'm sure there's stuff that's in my act that is of that nature that I need to get out of my act, but I do my best to not have stuff like that, even though it works. That's why people do hacky stuff is it's effective. They go in and it comes across like you're tailoring your material for the place, but they just say that at every town. I heard a
Right.
great story about somebody, basically the comic asked the bartender the name of the town that was nearby, and the comic was a white comic, and the bartender just told them the name of the black community nearby, the
Mm.
black the black city. So the comic goes on stage and he starts shitting on that town.
Oh no.
And it just came across like he was being super racist, and the crowd
Oh
started
no.
hating him,
Oh
which
no.
I thought was pretty funny. The bartender was just cracking up too. So, uh,
Oh
you
man.
know, and there's different stories of that type of stuff too. So it's sort of inside baseball stand up stuff, but there's a lot of stuff. I guess having done the road full time for year plus now, or
Yeah.
year and a half plus, like there's a lot of stuff that you have to balance. Like, how do I make this work? How do I do this show without sacrificing your integrity too much? And it's hard. I
Mm.
mean, it's a lot easier to kind of just give that room what they want versus what is legitimate, honest stand up. Because I could go to any city and just be like, "Oh, this is what you like. Let me just give you what you like," and that's not me.
Hmm. So tell me more
So,
about what's you, because maybe some people are going to be checking you out for the first time in January here. So how would you describe your act for someone who's never seen it?
hard question. You're hitting me with all the toughie. I would definitely say that writing is the backbone of my stand up,
Hmm.
and I'm working to be a better performer and continue to work at that quite a bit. Definitely have a dark comedic sensibility,
Mm.
but sort of drifting currently into more immature humor, I guess, like
Mm.
some bathroom jokes, some kind of impressions and silly stuff, like trying to get closer to like sitting at the lunch table in the third grade than anything without jeopardizing like what I think is my comedic integrity.
Hmm.
Have some new stuff that I've been working on about my trip to Canada recently and going through what I like to call a Canadian obstacle course, which was driving from Osoyoos to Castlegar and then headed home and went through every type of weather possible: black ice, snow, rain, just deer coming out of nowhere. And like my final boss on this trip was a overly friendly Canadian guy
Hmm.
who found out that I was driving to Osoyoos that night and
Mm.
wanted to know if I had snow tires, blah, blah. Ended up coming outside with me, and I'll leave the rest for when people come to see me live. But it was a very fun story. So some stuff about travel, definitely some new stuff about sports, basketball. Been working on a few things like that because I'm a big basketball player. I've been trying to write a joke about my cat for like 2 years now. I
Oh
can't,
yeah.
man. I'm obsessed with this cat, and I can't figure out what's funny about him to audiences. But when I crack that, that's going to be a big win.
Well, maybe before your January trip, you'll think of something.
Yeah, hopefully something observational. The closest that I can get right now is that he's got an anxiety disorder, and he panics when my girlfriend isn't around,
Mm.
and he just wants her to hold them or whatever. So then he comes up to me and I gotta hold this cat. But he doesn't really want me to hold him. He just needs to be held. So I'm just standing in the apartment holding this cat with an anxiety problem, and both of us are sort of uncomfortable. But how I get a bit out of that, I don't know yet. But there's a lot of stuff that's always kind of in work.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's good, but it's often just coming from your own, personal experiences, right? And your relationships. I think that's what connects with the audience the most, right? When you're being authentic about your own life and your own views, right?
Yeah, it's just hard. There's a lot of it's the needle in the haystack, so you got to comb through all the stuff, and a lot of it just comes down to like bringing ideas on stage and working through them. And sometimes they don't work, sometimes they do. But Norm Macdonald was one of the best comics of all time, and he just loved bombing. Like he loved taking ideas on stage and just like working through them and kind of wasting the audience's time, especially
Mhm.
like at the Comedy Store. He was known as being like he bombed better than anybody.
Yeah.
And although that sounds negative, you end up developing some pretty solid material out of it.
Mm.
It just is unfortunately part of the process.
Hmm.
If all you're doing is your A stuff and it's killing the whole way through, you're not really growing. You're just doing what's been proven and presenting.
Right.
So I'm
Yeah.
always sort of trying to figure out ways to work on what I've done and then create new stuff. But it's hard, especially when you drove 40,000 miles this year. So I don't have as much time to like dig in and work on stuff as I'd like to. But
You'll be flying to Calgary, right? Because you said you won't have a car.
yes,
Yeah.
thank
You're not
God on
driving.
that one. That one, I was gonna drive up there, and I talked to a comic who had done that before, and he's like, "Dude, that's those mountain like, do not do that."
Yeah.
I think he's right. There, I've
Yeah.
been on some sketchy drives this year, and I'm hoping to do a lot less of that this next year because that's not exactly the way I want to go. Is like trying to get to some bar in Central Washington and end up
Yeah.
off the side of the road. So.
Yeah, January is very unpredictable about with road conditions. So yeah, smart not to take the road up. But I'm really glad that you'll be coming up to Calgary next month here in January. Been awesome talking to you, Adam. It's been a lot of fun. I just want to remind everyone. So Adam's going to be at the Comedy Cave in downtown Calgary from January 6th to 11th. And you can learn more about himself, his background, and the upcoming performances in various places at adamtillercomedy.com. Been great chatting with you, Adam. I hope you have a safe trip up here to Calgary. And I understand there's a promo code for the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and thanks for everybody that listened. The website for the shows is comedycave.com/shows, and they're offering a code for the Monday through Thursday shows for anybody that's interested in coming through on January 6th through the 9th. And if you use the code Adam33, all lowercase for the letters, you'll get 33% off. It should be myself and some comics based out of Calgary that week. If anybody would like to come check it out, love to see you. Adam33 is the code.
Awesome, thanks. And I definitely plan to bring a buddy to one of your shows when you're here. That'll be great to see you. And if your schedule stays open, maybe I'll even take you out to the mountains if you want to check out Banff and Canmore and see what that's all about.
That sounds fun. Appreciate it, Dan. If you do happen to come down to Seattle, I can show you the parts of it that I like. We can skip some of the other areas, but it's I'm looking forward to Calgary. Anybody that's interested in checking out some of my stand up, Adam Tiller Comedy on YouTube. And then I'm on Instagram. That's where I post most of my dates and like most recent clips. I'm going to be doing some shows in Canada in addition to Calgary in the next few weeks and coming years. So if you're around the area, check it out and love to have you come out.
Awesome, thanks, Adam, and really looking forward to it. And thanks again for your time. Safe travels, and we'll see you here in Calgary very soon.
Sounds great. Thanks, Dan.